Hi, good evening. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming back. We're going to be continuing we're going to go back a little bit where we left off, because there's a Rambam and a Rosh that will be referenced in a Noda B'Yehuda we're going to see today. I'm going to explain all of this. And just to remind everyone, we're in the second part of a two-part series on human dignity as a factor in halakhic decision-making. And what we saw was that the Yerushalmi was willing to take this very amorphous, almost abstract concept of human dignity and allow it a weightiness and a presence in halakhic psak, very similar to pikuach nefesh, right? The statement was, Gadol Kavod HaBeriyot, Shodoche lo ta'aseh b'Torah l'sha'ah achat, right? Great is human dignity, that it overrides a negative commandment in the Torah temporarily, right? That's what pikuach nefesh does. That's what threat to life does. You're allowed to violate Shabbat. You're allowed to violate other laws in order to save life. And we have Rabbi Zera in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, essentially equating it with pikuach nefesh. He doesn't say that explicitly, but conceptually, that's what's happening. The Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, in response, churns over that possibility over and over, and every time it considers a Kavod HaBeriyot situation, it downgrades it to one lo ta'aseh, one negative commandment, the negative commandment of you shall not deviate from that which the rabbis tell you. In other words, rabbinic law. So the pasuk, the verse in the Torah that allows the rabbis to legislate, that's the lo ta'aseh you're allowed to violate to preserve human dignity. That's more or less where we got to. We talked about three broad categories that really represent the human experience of indignity. We talked about nakedness in a public space. We talked about dignity in the bathroom, the need for privacy and to clean oneself. And finally, the way we care for our dead. And as I mentioned last week, the Nazis very deliberately stripped us of dignity in all three of those categories. Very, very deliberate, to make us feel subhuman, like animals, like we had no humanity. Nothing about us represented the human species. We were so dirty and degraded, and the bodies were treated so badly. Side by side, I began to tease out another idea, another entry point to human dignity that was not about the human body. I gave a few examples. One was already Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the Tosefta, who suggested that a thief who steals a sheep pays a little less than when he steals an ox, because he looks ridiculous carrying the bleating sheep away or slinging it over his neck as he steals it. And somehow he wants to suggest, again, it doesn't have to be a rationally convincing argument. As my 18-year-old said this week, why are we letting him get away even a little bit with that, right? It's not about theft is theft and he's being penalized. But Rabbi Yochanan suggests that because stealing a sheep degrades his dignity in the manner in which he has to steal the sheep, then he pays a little less than the ox. Of course, the Torah doesn't explain why. It just, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is coming up with a suggestion. That kind of indignity is very different than the indignity of being naked. And it's a very subjective experience. It could be that farmers will tell you they don't feel undignified at all when they take their livestock to market, because that's what it means to be a farmer. Whereas a person on the street will be very self-conscious of carrying a squirming, animal that might be even defecating or doing whatever it's doing, and I'm walking away and everyone's noticing me. So dignity is a very subjective experience in that frame. The second example was the ripped talit. Rabbi Meir of Rottenburg brings an example of someone who comes to shul in the Middle Ages and grabs a talit from the pile Presumably they didn't wear their talitot. Maybe not everyone owned a talit. And you get to shul and you discover a ripped talit, which is prohibited from wearing on Shabbat because it's muktzah. And so he talks about allowing the person to wrap himself, not make a blessing because the talit is not a kosher talit, but kind of hide the rip in a way that he looks like everyone else. That need to blend, that need to not stand out is a very different and very subjective definition of dignity. I'm now just going to bring, as I said, two voices in the conversation that we didn't really get to. The Rambam and the Rosh on shatnez. So we were in a conversation about if I discover I'm wearing linen and wool, which is a biblical prohibition, do I have to rip off my garment in the marketplace, even if it means I will possibly be naked? In the time of the Talmud, they do not have undergarments the way we have undergarments. They wore robes. And so it is possible that this person will be naked. Now, I have to say that, again, I like to quote my 18-year-olds. They often have interesting insights. We have interesting conversations. And they were largely of the opinion, who would do that? And I said to them, listen to me carefully. Think about in a world in which service to God is all that guides you, whatever that requires. And if that is what's necessary, if that's what is decided halachically, if that is your avodat Hashem, even that. And I can absolutely imagine people who if that is ein etzah ve'ein tfuna ve'ein chokhmah lifnei Hashem, if it's like serving God or I am rendered, and I am rendered undignified, then that is what I have to do. That is my obedience and submission. So they were having a hard time with that. I have pointed out, and I've pointed it out to other colleagues, more scholarly than I, that women are not being discussed here. I don't know what would happen if there were a woman wearing shatnez in the marketplace, and whether anyone would consider it to be reasonable to rip off the clothing of women in the marketplace so a woman would be naked. That would be a very complex situation for the rabbis, given the need to protect the men in society from sexual provocation and nakedness and so on. I have not found an answer. Okay, what I want to look at is the Rambam and the Rosh, just to show you two voices. As I said, this is more of a prep for the Noda B'Yehuda, an 18th century rabbinic authority, a very significant one. When a person sees kilayim that are forbidden by scriptural law, by the Torah, on his friend, even if the latter is walking in the marketplace, he should jump up and rip it off him immediately. This applies even to his teachers, from whom he has learned wisdom. For obligation to honor people, your teacher, your parent, does not supersede a negative prohibition in the Torah. The Rambam is very clear. He totally disagrees, right? It's the Bavli versus the Yerushalmi. And he says, Ein chokhmah ve'ein etzah ve'ein tfuna leneged Hashem. There is nothing to do. There is no rational thinking, there is no arguing, there is no svarot, logical inference. If this is a d'oraita and it's on your friend, let alone on yourself, you rip his clothing off of him, even if it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. Okay, that's the Rambam. The Rosh is going to be a little more circumspect, or maybe a lot. He says, "Hamotzi kilayim d'oraita b'bigdo." If you, the person, suddenly notice you're wearing kilayim, maybe don't look so hard till you get home, is my suggestion, but okay. If you discover in your garment that you're wearing shatnez, you're wearing this mix of linen and wool that's prohibited, afilu bashuk, even in the marketplace, you have to rip off your clothing. Aval kilayim d'Rabbanan lo, but kilayim that are rabbinically prohibited, you don't have to do that. Ve'ein bin daktakim b'meid, and so on and so forth. And then it says, and here this is very important. Oh, she'eino yodea shehu lovesh kilayim. Someone is sitting in the Beit Midrash, v'hu yoshev b'Beit HaMidrash. Eino tzarich lahodio sheyesh sham meid. O shehu lovesh kilayim. If a Kohen is sitting in the Beit Midrash, or a person is sitting wearing linen and wool, and either of them are oblivious to what is happening, you can protect the Kohen from becoming impure until he leaves the Beit Midrash, and you can avoid ripping your friend's garment off until he gets home, right? The Rush basically says, if you yourself recognize you're wearing kilayim, you have an obligation to act. Kum va'aseh, get up and do something. But if it's your friend, shave va'al ta'aseh, sit and essentially do nothing. You do not have to do anything. And he writes, and the Tur, who is the son of the Rosh, writes, because of Kavod HaBeriyot, yishtok, he should be quiet, wait till he gets home, and let him be inadvertently transgressing. And what I think comes up here, and this is very interesting, the Rosh and then his son, the Tur, suggest that if I am not a person who's going to rip off my clothing in the marketplace, then I'm going to be deliberately transgressing. As I walk home, better not to tell me. Better not to tell me till I get home. Okay, and so that is the Rambam versus the Rosh. The Rambam's like, no, rip his clothing off him. Doesn't matter if he's your teacher. I get it's shocking. It's meant to shock. And the Rosh says, sheva al tasa, don't do anything. Just, you're a passive bystander. Don't cause him to be in a situation, apropos my students, where they're like, I would never do that. So then you're walking home deliberately wearing shatnez so as not to be naked in the marketplace. Okay, so that's, we're going to move into the new material now. And I sent it, so you should have it. We're going to move into the new material, which is going to build on some of what we're talking about. So my hope is we're going to get to a number of tshuvas. We are going to get to a number of tshuvas. I hope we'll get to all of them. Okay. We're going to pick up, I'm going to skip the first source. It's not really relevant to where I want to go. I apologize. It's an interesting source. It basically says that when a woman is executed and she is pregnant, you actually smack her on her uterus, on her pregnant belly, in order to essentially actively kill the fetus, so that it not bring her disgrace after she's executed. The presumption is that it will somehow slither out and everyone will see it and mock her and she's dead. So there's a form of like protecting her from disgrace after she's dead. That's what's happening there. My apologies for the grotesque example. What I want to move into is really probably my favorite tshuva of the Ramah, my favorite responsa of Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who lives in the 1500s, the 16th century in Krakow. And what I love about it is the story and how he responds with incredible compassion. So there is a seif, a paragraph in the Shulchan Aruch as follows. V'lo mekadshin, he's talking about on Shabbat. We don't do kiddushin on Shabbat. No, there's actually no really good reason to not do kiddushin. In other words, you're going to start coming up with reasons if I unmute you, I know. But really the act of kiddushin is not prohibited on Shabbat. The concern is you might come to write a contract or you might come to slaughter a sheep if more guests come. But the act of kiddushin itself is not actually prohibited. And so it's really because of Shema, you might come. The Ramah says, V'yesh matirin l'kadesh, hecha de'en lo isha ubanim. Interesting. The Ramah already begins to build a case. You'll see what I'm talking about as we get to the end. He's already beginning to bring Rishonim, early Talmudic authorities, who actually argue la halakha v'lo l'ma'aseh, halakhic philosophizing, rather than practical application. But Rabbeinu Tam, one of the Tosafos, right, one of the greatest Tosafists, Rashi's grandson, Yaakov Tam, writes, there are those who actually allowed kiddushin on Shabbat where a man was not yet married, had never been married and never had children. As an aside, in his commentary on this, it actually appears in I believe, Beitza. The Talmudic discussion is in Beitza. And the Tosfot right there are those who would allow it if a man had never been married, because there's a mitzvah, there's a positive commandment to fulfill pru or vu. You can only do that through marriage. So we're going to let you do the kiddushin, which is the first step towards fulfilling that mitzvah, possibly. And the Smag, the Sefer Mitzvot Gedolot writes, also one of the early on the boundary between actually he's also 1400s, a Rishon. He writes, if already the bride has gone into the chuppah and Shabbat happens, shari, it's permitted. So he has two Rishonim who basically say, in theory, we could allow it. Okay, that's going to be important. Even though they actually don't rule practically, they bring it as conceptually permitted. Now the Rama is going to begin presenting something that, if you're paying attention, can only be based on a real story. In the Rama, in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't bring the whole story, but he's beginning to hint to it. And he says, well, nonetheless, one can rely on this in a case of urgency, gam ki gadol kavod HaBeriyot, because great is human dignity. To which you kind of tilt your head and say, huh? Like, what does human dignity have to do with getting married on Shabbos? Keep going. Kamo sheregilin shelifamim shelo hayu yecholim lahashvot im hanedunya biyom vav. For instance, theoretically, that people can't agree on the dowry before Friday ad halayla, until nighttime. So you're like, that's a really specific kind of example we're getting here. De'osin ha'chuppah v'kiddushin b'leil Shabbat. That then the chuppah and kiddushin can take place on Shabbat. So he's describing a scenario where the arguments over the dowry become so heated on Friday when they're supposed to get married that the wedding only takes place on Shabbat. They've already prepared the meal, and for the marriage. It would be deeply embarrassing for the bride and groom in lo yichnosas. It would be deeply embarrassing if they did not marry them. And nonetheless, a priori, try to avoid this situation. Okay, this comment, it piqued my interest. Like, what's going on here? This is not like just a cut and dry halakha, or like, oh, we have a custom in Ashkenaz, so and so. There's a backstory, I always felt. And I found the responsa. I mean, I have to say, one of my teachers directed me towards it. And we're going to read through it. I'm going to use the English just because, or maybe I'll read pieces of the Hebrew. I always like to get into the language, the original language, but we're always short on time. And so the Rama starts talking about weddings on Friday. Well, it turns out in Krakow, people got married on Friday. People were very, very poor in Krakow in the 16th century. And it was essentially a 2-for-1, because you would go into Shabbat and the wedding feast would be the Friday night meal. So you wouldn't have to like getting married on Monday, you have to feed all your guests, but then you're going to have to prepare dinner Friday night. You water the soup, you add a few little chicken wings, whatever it is you do, you invite some people, and really it's a 2-for-1 sale. You're going to go into Shabbat, you're going to try to get the chuppah close to Shabbat so that you can go into Shabbat and have the Su'udah on Shabbat, or at least start it before Shabbat and continue into Shabbat, which you could also do. So also for me, that was interesting, right? That in Krakow, they're getting married on Friday. I'll just say my daughter is getting married a week from Friday, right? In Israel, it is also not uncommon. It's actually quite common in the summer when the clock changes for there to be weddings on Friday. It's our Sunday. We don't have Sundays as a day off. And we're actually going to go right into Shabbat. We are going to feed our guests a meal at the wedding, and then we're going to have a separate meal at the Kfar Etzion. But Baruch Hashem, thank God, we are not facing the terrible poverty that existed in Krakow, but very similar reasons. Okay. Let's take a look at this story. It's an incredible story. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. I heard behind me, now I want to remind everyone, the Rama is the greatest halakhic authority of his time, parallel to the Shulchan Aruch, one of the greatest halakhic authorities. He's a revered rabbi in Krakow, and he is not going to get away with what happens in this responsa, which just shows us that rabbis are always getting attacked for brave halakhic decision making. And he is going to be attacked very, very badly by his colleagues all around him. I heard behind me, the sound of a great voice. Voices passed through the camp saying, "Look at that man, Moshe." Right now, by the way, what is he doing? It's a play on words, right? The Atu Acharei Moshe, Exodus 33, that everyone followed Moshe's eye with their eyes as he walked in and out to talk to God in the Oel Moed. He takes his name very seriously. He feels like he is continuing the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's basically describing everyone looking at him for this decision. It concerned the action taken by me recently when I arranged a wedding in the usual way. All knew the state of the bride as she entered under the wedding canopy. It was in the dark of night on Friday evening, an hour and a half after night had fallen. The circumstances which impelled me to this action are clear. It is known to all who live in the city, and this is what happened. And he basically says, I'm not going to have to explain myself because everyone knows the story, and yet everyone's acting as if they don't know the story, and I'm going to make order here, and he is not going to back down. There was a poor man in our land who had betrothed his elder daughter to a suitable mate. During the period of the betrothal, which was of considerable duration, the father went to his world and left life to all of Israel. The father dies and leaves behind a very young girl who has been betrothed for a considerable period of time, okay? The daughter was left bereaved without father and mother, except for relatives who lived far from her. They shut their eyes to her plight, all except one relative, the brother of her mother, who brought her into his house, for she had no relatives closer than he. So he's already explaining that this is an orphaned child, no mother, no father. She's a young girl. We don't know how old she is, but assume teens. She's a teenager at the most. Teens, 15, 16, 17. She has no family, and her relatives don't want to take her in. And I want to defend that for a moment because the relatives are not going to look good here, not on either side. Remember, I said there's terrible poverty in Krakow, that it's not so simple to take in another mouth to feed. And we're going to see in a moment, the dowry is significant, a significant piece in this situation. And the brother, her uncle, basically takes her in. Then when the time came from her marriage and was time to prepare for the feast and the requirements of the wedding canopy, she did not see anything of the dowry and the other needs which the relatives had promised her. You can imagine the relatives had promised as the man lay dying, we'll take care of her, don't worry, of course, but he died. And now no one wants to really step up. It's very, very sad, and it's very, very real. But she was told to take her ritual bath as a kala teacher, as someone who teaches brides, as someone who's very involved in the mikvah. This always moves me. At this point, she doesn't have her dowry. And yet, go to the mikvah and prepare herself for the marriage, and that the dowry would be forthcoming. This maiden then did as the women neighbors commanded her. They decked her with the veil on the 6th day, as virgins are bedecked. He calls her a betula a lot. I believe he's trying to really strike home the urgency that we have a betula, a virgin girl, who is tahora, who is pure. And if this doesn't happen, what we're about to read, she's going to be very vulnerable to predators, right? There's no, right? So he really actually quite a few times calls her kala betula, which is what she'd be called in her ketubah. But what I hear is let's try to protect her into the wedding canopy. Like she needs protection. She doesn't have her father. When the shadows of the evening began to fall and Shabbat was approaching, it's getting late in the day, her relatives who were to give the dowry closed their fists and refused to give a sufficient amount, so that at least a third of the dowry was still lacking. Then the groom absolutely refused to marry her. He paid no attention to the pleas of the leader of the city that he refrained from putting a daughter of Israel to shame for the sake of mere money. He refused to listen to them as a deaf serpent does not hear the voice of a charmer, nor did the voice of the rabbi, me, meaning Moshe Isserles, he's talking, move him. So here's the story, right? This young girl, orphaned, right? We have all these values. We teach them all the time. Be kind to the orphan and the widow and the ger and so on. And when push comes to shove, she's very, very vulnerable and no one is really stepping up. And the leaders are trying, but no one's offering to pay the third of the dowry. And I would like to argue, again, maybe no one has it. And I would also like to suggest marriage is a financial, arrangement. I mean, we act as if, well, what about love? There's no love, no love, right? That no one's fallen in love. She was betrothed through some sort of contract between the fathers, right? Who knows if the groom really knows her? I assume he's seen her or whatever, but he has no emotional connection to her. And part of a marriage is financial stability. He's expected to provide for her. But the dowry is meant to give him the means to start whatever business he wants to start. Think, Fiddler on the Roof and Muttle. He needs a sewing machine to really move ahead as a tailor, right? This is, on one hand, there's a cruelty here, and it bothers me, the lack of compassion. And of course, the Rama is telling the story as he tells the story. I want to be a little compassionate to the groom, who, first of all, might be a very young man with parents telling him, you may not marry. You cannot marry her. They promised us the dowry. They have it. They're not giving it, right? Like, we can imagine how this is getting very, very heated. But the rabbi and the leaders, all they can see is this young girl in her white wedding dress. Probably not white, because white is a later minhag. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. But the point is that she's waiting to she's gone to the mikvah, right? She's waiting to get married. Because of these quarrels, time drew on, as the saying goes. There is no marriage settlement without dispute, and the work of Satan prompted them until the time mentioned above came. Then they finally agreed, and the groom consented to enter under the wedding canopy, and no longer shame a worthy daughter of Israel. Thereupon I arose and conducted the marriage at that hour. At which point I think we should all applaud, right? That took, on one end, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Ein mekadshim b'Shabbat, no kiddushin on Shabbat. On the other hand, the Rama has told us, right? I read the piece before, there is precedent. It's not usur, it's not prohibited. We don't do it because people might come to violate law, but I conducted it, he says. You're going to have to trust me. No writing took place, no money, like it was absolutely Shabbos friendly, and it had to be done. Okay. Now, since people are complaining against me, I have come now to remove their complaints from me and to bring the proof and the reasons upon which I relied in this matter, saying, in this way, behold and sanctify. I love this. He has to defend himself. He's the greatest rabbinic authority. He's an incredible sage. He had halakhic courage here to avoid the shame. And he's gonna be really straight about this. In any event, by the way, this tshuva goes on for pages and pages and pages. It just shows how tense the situation was. In any event, all of these words are enough to say in my name that one can permit in such a case, for it was an hour of emergency, and the virgin bride was humiliated if we would delay the chuppah after the mikveh until after Shabbat. Furthermore, it is not customary to walk about with the veil. What, you're going to walk around with the veil until after Shabbat? And we don't marry Motzei Shabbat. Motzei Shabbat, even more than Friday night, because there's afraid people will start violating Shabbat early to prepare for the feast. So she can't get married Saturday night. And she can't get married on Sunday, as is the custom of the Christian citizens who marry on their holy day, which means that the wedding would have to wait till Monday, right? If he misses this window, the next window is Monday. And that's a long time, given everything that's happening. And Rabbeinu Tam is worthy enough to rely on. He says, Rabbeinu Tam says a man who hasn't been previously married and has no children can get married on Shabbat. We can rely on that in an hour of emergency. Even more so when the sugya in the Gemara can be read with his explanation beautifully, and thus ruled. And brought the smug. He also brought the smug. In times of great need, it was permitted to betroth and marry on Shabbat. Now, it's true he would not rule this way in practice, only in principle, but in other words, where there is great need, one should permit. He writes that in times of great need. And there is no greater need than this, that this orphan is greatly humiliated and would bear this blight all of her days to distinguish her from all the other virgins. If the wedding gets canceled now, he's going to say there are two possibilities. Number one, it's not going to happen. He's going to write that. Number two, everyone's going to remember this story. If I just went and married them, no one's going to remember the story in a month. But if it waits days and days and the whole town is talking about it for days, she's never going to recover. And this is where he says the line that mashma'am, he says, gadol Kavod HaBeriyot. I think no, I didn't. Hold on one second. I thought I had, highlighted it, but you'll have to trust me. He says, Gadol Kavod HaBeriyot shedoche lo ta'aseh Shabbat Torah. He says it's not even a question. Human dignity is great that it overrides a negative commandment of do not turn astray. And this manner is it's a rabbinic prohibition, not getting married on Shabbat. For fear one may come to right? Like, or masawatan, it's an acquisition. But that's it. It's rabbinic fences. Not only do we have to be concerned that the shidduch not be called off completely and the match nullified because of the terrible fighting and quarreling going on between them. And great is peace between a husband and wife, even though they are only engaged. One should be lenient since she has already attached him intimately. Now, it's interesting. He says it about the girl, not about the boy. He says, this girl knows her father chose this man for her, and she's already emotionally attached to him. He may not have emotional feelings back. That might take time. But he says she already has emotional intimacy, as Rabbeinu Tam in the Rush wrote. With regard to a betrothed maiden who becomes a mourner, we allow her to enter the chuppah after 7 days of Shiva because of his need to procreate. He says there are other precedents for like bending the rules a little bit. And we are also lenient with regard to betrothing minor girls against the words of Chazal. What's interesting here, I won't go into it. He brings this crazy story where an older rabbi ends up betrothing like a 12-year-old, which again, in the Middle Ages would have been more common than now. And he says, I don't see any of you guys attacking him. And the rabbi said, you shouldn't betroth minors. I guess she's not quite 12, right? She's between 11 and 12. And you turned an eye to that. Like, what are you doing? Why are you giving me such a hard time? In that story, by the way, I don't remember if she's his niece or a close friend of the father, and the father dies. Whatever it is, the girl wants to marry this older man. It's a lovely story also. Maybe not for our times, but in responsa literature. And why am I toiling? He writes, go out and see what is going on outside, especially in our city. And sometimes 5 or 6 klupot are carried out in one day. And let's be honest, he says, they actually go into Shabbat. There are so many of them lined out outside of the registrar, meaning the rabbi, that by the time the rabbi gets to the 6th chuppah on a Friday, come on, it's already Shabbos. Like what I'm doing, we're all doing. It's just that I had the audacity to be like really open about it. But he says, come on, I know what happens. 5 or 6 chupot, and now he says something that if you're paying attention is a great sarcastic comment. He says, for one does not distinguish bringing in the Shabbat, I'm over here, with Baruch Hu or not. He's like, come on, you're telling me, oh, but we didn't say Baruch Hu. That 6th chuppah was before Baruch Hu. He's like, but it was dark outside. Like, what are you playing this silly game? We didn't say the evening prayer yet, so it's not really Shabbos. Shabbos comes in whether you say the evening prayer or not, right? He says it's not up to the congregation to decide it's Shabbat when we say Baruch Hu, when we open up the evening prayer. Lechadodi didn't exist yet, by the way. No Kabbalat Shabbat, right? So it's not Baruch Hu. But Shabbat is determined its time from the time it gets dark with regard to Kiddush and Maaser and so on. And he basically says, what are you joking? Like, you guys are doing this all the time. All of you rabbis who marry on Friday, there's always that late wedding that goes into Shabbat. And you're like, okay, hold Mariv, hold the evening prayer. It's not Shabbos yet, but it's Shabbos. You're like, basically, you're hypocrites. And the truth is, the need of the hour brings us to be lenient with these things, which are only rabbinic prohibitions. And in great need, they did not decree. And with this I rest, and with this I remove doubt. For one should certainly be careful to prepare everything before Shabbat, so this situation does not recur. He's like, I don't want this to be a precedent. But if it already happens, what can one do? And the hour became late until it was suddenly dark. And one has to fear the breakup of the couple or humiliating the virgin, to rely on leniency to avoid total loss. And one can rejoice in the peace and the pleasure of Shabbat afterwards. Thus says Moshe, the son of my father, teacher at Yisrael of blessed memory, the one called Moshe Isserles of Krakow. It's a beautiful, beautiful tshuva. There's like poetry in it, the way he writes. If you could read the Hebrew, you would see it even more. He intertwines psukim. It's quite beautiful. He has so much compassion for this girl. And he is like, I am not allowing this girl to suddenly be thrown to the wolves. It will be devastating. He'll recover. He'll be fine. but she will never get over this. And it could be she'll never be able to marry after this, like if this happens. And what happens to this bitula under the chuppah, right, who went to the mikveh. So that's Moshe Yisrael of Krakow. He doesn't only use Kavod HaBeriyot, but it is the driving force. It is absolutely the concept, the values, what indignity is. And of course, we're not talking about nakedness or the bathroom or a dead body. We're talking about the very human experience of what it means to undergo profound shame and humiliation. Okay, I'm actually going to skip Rav Ovadia right now. I hope we'll have time to come back to this one, but I want to get to the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda is going to cite the Rosh and the Rambam I mentioned. This example, it's 1770, and I have to be honest, I'm blanking on where the Noda B'Yehuda lived. I don't know if it's Russia or Lithuania. If someone remembers, I don't believe it's Poland. If someone knows, it might be, it's Ashkenaz, but I don't remember which country. It is the 18th century. Okay, that I know. He's, again, one of the greatest rabbinic authorities of the time. This tshuva is going to come up again in Rav Ovadia, and I've seen it in other responsim as well. So it turns out this case study is actually not as uncommon as you might think. Okay, get ready. Your letter dated the 9th of the month reached me yesterday, and although I am currently preoccupied with the burdens of my students, combined with the general distractions of this time, nevertheless, the matter touches on those who return, penitents, balei tshuva. I said the gates of repentance are always open, especially since you were mentioned in your letter. This concerns a bar beirav, a student of Torah. Now, the root of the question is that someone transgressed for 3 years consecutively, during which he was living with a woman. He carries on an affair with the married woman. I've read parts of the tshuva in Hebrew, also a very long tshuva, with a married woman. Okay, he's an unmarried man. It seems like he's renting a room in this home, and he carries on an affair with the mistress. Now he has been awakened to repentance, and blessed is he, for his Torah has stood by him, so that he did not become firmly entrenched in impurity. I'm already going to say the next line is so ludicrous, but we're going to read it. His soul seeks to know, since he is now the son-in-law of this woman, since he married her daughter, is he obligated to inform his father-in-law, to separate from his wife the adulteress, or is silence better? This literally is a telenovela. Like, you couldn't make this stuff up. He marries the daughter of the woman he's been having an affair with for 3 years. And now, in a fit of conscience, he feels like, well, he really should tell the husband. Dude, you really should go to a therapist and work through some of this. Like, now you want to tell your father-in-law? Now that you married the daughter and you're like enmeshed in this family in the most profound way, now you have a fit of conscience? Like, maybe you should have done that a few years ago or before you married the daughter. Anyway, that's the story. They are people of reputation. In fact, in the tshuva, I think they have 15 children, and the sons are like Talmidei Chachamim. This is like a hush of a family, we would say. This is a serious family, a serious rabbinic and scholarly family. And the sons are grown up, and they're also Torah scholars. An esteemed family. There is concern about a tarnished reputation. And basically, he says here something that he doesn't stick to. And I don't know why. I often wonder, and I'll tell you my own read, and you'll tell me what you think when we get to the end of the tshuva. Due to Kavod HaBeriyot, the penitent is permitted to do nothing and not inform his father-in-law at all. So he throws out the idea that maybe Kavod HaBeriyot is enough to avoid telling the father-in-law. Maybe he shouldn't tell the father-in-law because of human dignity. Okay, so that's where we're seeing this. Now, I write here in brackets, because I didn't want to translate the whole tshuva. The Noda B'Yehuda related this question to the argument between the Rambam and the Rush. The Rambam says, tear off the shotness in the marketplace on your rabbi or friend or teacher or whoever. He would say, of course, the adulterer has to tell the father-in-law what he's done. The Rush, on the other hand, would say, you know what? Maybe not. If you see shotness in another person, maybe just sit and not act. Maybe don't say anything. Right? Maybe sheva al ta'aseh. So he brings this, Yet he further asks whether it is correct to say he's required to inform him. The adulterer wants to know, do I have to inform him? And if he informs him, and this is like, again, this guy really needs to get a grip. Well, what if the father-in-law doesn't listen to him? Now, what's supposed to happen is if a man discovers his wife has willingly committed adultery, he's supposed to divorce her. He certainly is not allowed to resume living with her. And now the tzaddik, the adulterer tzaddik, is concerned. What if he tells his father-in-law and the father-in-law doesn't divorce his mother, the wife? And does he now have to go to the rabbinic court? So the rabbinic court compels the husband to divorce his wife. Now, the reason I'm being a little bit cynical and tongue-in-cheek is like, you're too enmeshed in this story. You're so nogea b'davar. Now you've suddenly become the jury and the judge, and you want to see this woman pay. Now, I could read between the lines. Maybe she seduced him. Maybe, again, the fit of conscience is so, his shame and regret is so intense that unless the father-in-law does what the Torah compels him to do, then maybe he has to make sure it gets done. The bait, right? Like, this is so complicated. This story is just incredible because it's so complicated. He asked for guidance, how to respond to this man according to his abilities. He's a very weak person. He's chalash, it seems like physically weak, but is consistent in his Torah study. So basically he says, he goes through this whole thing. Even if there is a general obligation to inform him, perhaps only when one's words will be effective. In other words, if your friend is wearing shatnez and you can in the moment show how you know that there's proof, then maybe that's when you have to tell him. But if the friend's going to turn to you and say, I don't believe you, and better he be a shogeg, better he not know, better it be incidental. Or if the woman committed adultery with two valid witnesses, yes, then there's proof. But here, even if he tells the husband, he might not be believed. He is, after all, like one person against two, not to mention that he's very nogea b'davar, he's very involved in the situation. And thus his words will not be effective because a woman is not prohibited to her husband unless there is warning and seclusion or clear witnesses. So maybe he doesn't have to tell him, right? The Noda B'Yehuda kind of ping-pongs between, does he have to tell him? Because the man is living with his wife and maybe he doesn't know and he's supposed to not live with her anymore. And to maybe you're not obligated to tell him because, yes, you're the adulterer, but sota is only where there's a whole protocol. Nonetheless, it appears this reasoning is not sufficient to exempt him, for if we're clear, the husband would believe him and take action. Certainly he would be obligated to tell him. So he goes through this whole thing. It is sufficient that he inform the husband alone. For either way, if the husband accepts his words, he will separate, and that is good. If the husband does not accept his words and does not believe him, then obviously you don't go to the Beit Din. What's the Beit Din going to do about it? And he says, not only may you not go to the Beit Din, it's usur, it's prohibited, and you might even be liable for lashes. Like, he's basically saying to the adulterer, slow down. Do not make this a public spectacle. Do not go to the rabbinic court. You may not go to the rabbinic court. But he also understands that this guy is so hepped up in his drive for penance and it's now his father-in-law. And he has to see his mother-in-law and father-in-law all the time acting as if they're a regular married couple. Like, it's blowing his mind. I mean, I really think he should have married someone else, but okay. And so he basically says, you should tell the man, you don't even have to tell him that it's you, just tell him you hear she's committed adultery, and if he doesn't believe you, then you can say it's you, and so on. And he should seek forgiveness from his father-in-law, absolutely. And then what's interesting is the sinner is very wealthy. So he's obviously like a good catch. And he should increase his giving of tzedakah, and he should fast, and he should triple the number of days that he fasts. And he basically says, you probably weren't careful if she was nida or not, if she went to the mikveh or not, because you were committing adultery, so nothing else mattered, and so on. And that's the tshuva. So it's a startling tshuva. It's a fascinating tshuva. At one point, he basically says to the whoever he's writing to, you also have to take into consideration that the husband really knows and has already separated himself. He says to the adulterer, there's actually no obligation to divorce your wife if she commits adultery, but you're not allowed to resume sexual relations with her. And he suggests that a 3-year affair in the home might be something the husband actually knew about, maybe, and already doesn't sleep with her, right? Like already doesn't want to divorce her because of the shame. Like every piece of this is so interesting. And again, it's the 1700s. We tend to think this is only the 20th century. No, it's happening in a number of places. I want to contrast it with the Yabia Omer, with Rav Ovadia Yosef, who's going to come up with the same situation, and he's going to rely on the Noda B'Yehuda, and he's going to bring up Kavod HaBeriyot also. So the Noda B'Yehuda in the end doesn't use Kavod HaBeriyot to override telling the father-in-law, but he brings it in as a consideration of maybe. And he goes back and forth. In some ways, he argues almost equally assiduously that you don't have to tell the husband as he argues that you have to tell the husband. But my read is that there's no way the adulterer is not going to tell the husband. There's just no way. Like a good posek recognizes the situation in front of him. This man is now enmeshed in the family. It's not like he can move away and ignore and be like, okay, new daf, I'm never going to commit adultery again, new page, I'm going to behave, like that's it, and I'm going to give charity and I'm going to fast and I'm never going to do that again, and better not to shame. He has to see it in front of him all the time. And there's no way he's not going to confess. There's just no way. And so I feel a little bit like the Noda B'Yehuda, I'm suggesting it, this is my read, that the Noda B'Yehuda allows him or encourages him to tell the husband, even as he's arguing all the reasons why he doesn't have to tell the husband, because he's going to tell the husband. The most he can do is make sure he doesn't go to the rabbinic court. Do not go to the Beit Din. And if you can, don't tell the husband it was you. And if you can't avoid telling the husband it was you, then ask him for forgiveness, like each piece of it. So let's see what Rav Ovadia Yosef does. I will stand and look within the law regarding one who stumbled with a married woman and had an affair with her consent in a way that she has prohibited to her husband. And the lover repented. I like the way the men are all the ones who are repented, and now they need to know what to do. I wants to know if he needs to tell her husband so that he separates himself from a prohibition, or if there is room to be lenient because, here we go, pgam mishpacha, blemish to the family, gadol kavod HaBeriyot. So here too, we're talking about, I don't know if it's a rabbinic family, but it's really a religious family will be embarrassing. So, the Torah knew what it was talking about when it said adultery is prohibited, right? It's one of the 10 commandments, because throughout the centuries, we have that as a challenge. From all that is said above, and in order not to lock the door in the face of those who do tshuva, it is possible to be lenient and not tell the husband because of the blemish to the family. V'gadol kavod HaBeriyot. He basically rules, and I would say again, he knows the Noda B'Yehuda. He says, no, I'm going to take that line, that this is going to cause a blemish, and gadol kavod HaBeriyot. And do not say there is no benefit in the repentance of the lover. As it is said in Chagiga, a crooked thing cannot be fixed. And this is one who had an affair with a married woman and prohibits her to her husband. And here, even if he tells the husband and he separates, he cannot fix the blemish. And as Rashi writes, there is memory of his sin in that she has become prohibited to her husband. And since there are those who say, as long as there are no witnesses, she is not prohibited, it is appropriate to rely on these sources in a time of great need, such as this one. He goes the step further, and I believe he's borrowing for the Noda B'Yehuda, what the Noda B'Yehuda does not do, because I think the situation at hand doesn't allow it. Rav Ovadia Yosef says, do not tell the husband. Gadol kavod HaBeriyot. So he will not be perceived as immersing in the mikvah with an insect in his hand. And as was written in the Shari Deya, even the Baal Tshuva is a man among men and brave of heart and whole in his repentance. One tells him by way of advising that if he is sure that when the husband finds out about his treachery, he will separate himself, then it's well for him to tell. Like again, he throws in at the end, if he's absolutely sure the husband will separate, then okay, tell him. But if you're not sure, don't tell him. And he should continue on with his repentance and do good deeds with all his strength and rejoice in his trials and tribulations and learn a lot of Torah. But he throws it in at the end. He basically says, okay, if really it's 100% that if you tell the husband that this happened, he will separate from his wife, then okay, then I guess tov ma'od lahodio. But otherwise, don't do it, right? Like he's very clear that do not tell the husband. It cannot end well, meaning like you are not the one to tell the husband. I want to bring one more Rav Ovadia Yosef, and then maybe we'll have time if anyone wants to ask a question. I love this Rav Ovadia Yosef. He does not explicitly mention Kavod HaBeriyot, but I believe that's what's driving him. I was asked regarding a woman in her youth, as a single woman, lived with a man and became pregnant. And when she realized she was pregnant, went to a doctor and had an abortion, and afterwards went to live in another city and became religious devotedly and wholeheartedly and married a yeshiva student who lived in fear of the word of God. And they lived together with love and peace between them. And she became pregnant and had a son. I didn't want to just end with 2 adultery tshuvos. I wanted to end like this is like the tea, right? She repented. She married a lovely man. They're happy, love and peace. But remember the backstory. Before she was married, before she was religious, she had a relationship with a man. She got pregnant. She had an abortion. The relationship ended. Now, I want to point out that it is not unlikely that she ended up in a more Haredi kind of yeshiva. That's what I'm going to suggest. And she was probably taught that abortion is prohibited unless the woman's life is in danger. And in fact, it's akin to murder if you abort, which is a more extreme position. Another time we can do a whole thing on abortion. Many of you may have heard lectures on abortion. I don't believe that's the only position in Judaism. But I can imagine that at some point in her journey, she heard that abortion is a mortal sin unless the woman's life is in danger. And she did not tell her husband. And I would also suggest, having read many testimonies of women who have had abortions, because I teach medical halakha, many women disassociate from it. They bury it so deep, so deep, that they don't talk about it. And it's such a painful experience, something they may be ashamed of, something they may not have wanted to do, something that was hard for them, that sometimes it only comes out years later. So I don't know if she deliberately doesn't tell him because she's afraid that maybe she's committed this terrible crime, or she doesn't tell him because it's buried. But nonetheless, that's the story. She became pregnant and she had a son, which is wonderful. But the husband wants to do a pidyon haben. He wants to redeem the firstborn son. And this is not her firstborn son because she had an abortion. And if you abort after 40 days, which is very short, it's 6 weeks into the pregnancy, a lot of times women don't even know they're pregnant, then it's called Peter Rechem. Then it's as if your uterus has been opened. And so you do not have the redeeming of the firstborn if a woman has had a miscarriage or an abortion after 6 weeks. Her husband wants to do pidyon haben because he did not know that before her marriage to him, his wife had become pregnant from another man and had aborted the fetus. And the woman came to the local rabbi to tell him all that had happened to her before her marriage to his yeshiva student. So she actually has to go now and tell the rav of this man. And she obviously doesn't, she says, do I have to tell her husband to save him from making a blessing in vain over the redeeming of the firstborn? Now she's really scared because her husband's going to get up there and take God's name in vain when he redeems his firstborn son. And now she's really, she's very agitated and very scared, and she doesn't know what to do. And she goes to tell the rabbi. If he finds out all that happened to his wife before marriage, the shalom bayit will be destroyed. Now, before I get to that, the local rabbi doesn't know what to do. He doesn't think he can permit it. He doesn't think he thinks she has to tell him. And I believe it was in Nitivot. That's the way at least it was told to me. And it makes its way to Rav Ovadia Yosef. And Rav Ovadia Yosef, in like 3 brush strokes, is like, this is not an issue. Of course she shouldn't tell him. Right? This is the kind of thing that could destroy their marriage. Meaning the time to tell him was 2 years ago. Now is not the time to tell him this information. He says, this may threaten the shalom bayit, it will be destroyed. And this may cause quarreling and dissent, and who knows where this will lead. He may never be able to look at her again. And perhaps it will come to divorce. So perhaps we can say great is peace between husband and wife, that even God's name can be erased. Sheva al ta'aseh, sit and do nothing. That's what's preferable. And like the Rambam, it's a beautiful tshuva. It's a beautiful tshuva. And this is where I'll go back to my 18-year-olds are always very shocked. They're like, oh my God, you have to tell your husband everything. How did she not tell him? How could they live in this secrecy? And the older women I teach, because I teach both age groups, one at Matam, one at TVA, are all like, No, of course she shouldn't tell him. I mean, that kind of information can only cause damage at this point, and they can live very happily in harmony if she can reabsorb this information, and if the rabbi will tell her it's okay. And I saw what you wrote, Herb. I'm not sure. There's a question whether taking God's name in vain is biblical, right? Like, is it right? Is it the second commandment, right? You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. It's an argument whether there's a possible quasi deoraita there. I agree with you largely. It could be a rabbinic, but it's not 100%. And so Rav Ovadia, in my opinion, is using Kavod HaBeriyot, because if she ends up telling her husband, this is going to get out. She has managed to build this beautiful life for herself. Some students asked me, does he know she's had relations with other men? Yes, of course. She's a Bala Tshuva. She couldn't have hidden that part of her past. I'm sure whatever, the Ketubah or however they worded it and so on, that kind of information would not be hidden. But her husband doesn't want to think about that past, right? Like, they're already years into a marriage that is built on Torah and mitzvot and Yirat Shamayim, all of those things. And like, to suddenly have to go back to what in his mind will be his sordid past, an abortion, illicit sexual relations, like, it really can upend their entire marital relationship, given where they are now. And Rav Ovadia is like, this is not an issue. Like, I love when a posek just comes in, he doesn't even write. This is the whole tshuva. This is like not even, this is just, he's not even defensive. He's like, no, this is not an issue. And so he doesn't relate to the abortion. He doesn't relate to the premarital sexual, none of that interests him. He's like, I have a situation here, Gadol Kavod HaBeriyot. And we saw it with the adultery thing as well, that he, unlike the Noda Yehuda, who I said, I really think because it's the son-in-law, he has a much more complicated situation to deal with. And I don't think he can prevent the adulterer. Like, I don't think there's any way. So then he creates a platform for it. But Rav Ovadia basically says, you shouldn't tell the husband and go do tshuva. And like, you can't fix this. And this is the kind of knowledge that once you tell is going to be destructive. And you can't control what the husband's going to do, which, by the way, the Noda Yehuda says also. You, the adulterer, can't control that he's going to decide to separate from his wife, and neither can the Beit Din. So you have to think very carefully whether you're telling her. So I wanted to bring that. This really is just bringing it around. Very different Kavod HaBeriyot tshuvas, right? This is a very different definition. To me, very, very moving. This idea that the awareness of humiliation and shame, which we really talk about a lot, that you must try to avoid creating humiliation and shame, you avoid embarrassing someone, it's like killing them and so on, translates into halakhic decision-making. I'll just conclude and say that there's a very long, very weighty, very dense, in the way only Rav Aaron Lichtenstein can write. Like, you have to look up half the words in the dictionary as you're reading, and I'm not kidding, and then reread it multiple times to try to figure out what he's saying. But one of the lines I like is he brings Kavod HaBeriyot. He asks a question. It's a whole essay on Kavod HaBeriyot. And he says, look, on one hand, I understand why we're wary of kind of unleashing human dignity as a principle. On the other hand, we've been too cautious. He's like, we're so afraid of it that we're not using it when we can. Do we have to be that afraid of it? Isn't there room to use it more broadly than it's being used? And really that line sticks with me, that we see the courage of the poskim who are willing to factor it in as they respond to a situation. And what Rav Aaron basically writes there is poskim are not doing it enough now. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the stories and the analysis as much as I did. I'm always very moved by these stories. Next week, we're actually going to be in a different topic. Your poor, my poor doesn't matter. Another favorite topic of mine, which is charity only meant to be inward facing towards the Jewish community? Is there room to give tzedakah and do chesed outward facing towards the non-Jewish community? And it's particularly shocking given how the Bavli, the time of the Bavli, non-Jews and Jews are not living in the harmony that, well, I would say we're living in today. That was deeply ironic. But until that many people find themselves in harmonious relationships and so on. The sources that I brought were supposed to be sent to you by Torah in Motion. If you did not get them, please, I can give you my email and I'm happy to send it. I'll stick it in the chat. or text the off. No, oh, I see you wrote questions. Let me take a quick look. For those who want to stick around, class, I'm officially ending the class. But thank you. Let's see some of the questions. Right. That's funny that someone, yes, the whole Kabbalat Shabbat is much later. Prague, yes, he was the rabbi in Prague. Thank you. So I think we more or less covered everything. So if anyone has a final question, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I'll let you go. Thank you. Nice to see you, Karen.
Was
And of
this
course,
your
Elaine.
first class?
What?
Or did you give a class last week?
I gave a class last week, which should be on YouTube. I believe wherever Torah in Motion stores its classes, there is the first class was last week.
I was wondering, I asked before, if you're osek b'mitzvah, you're pater from another mitzvah. And
Yeah.
the people who have to respond with these issues, and they're too difficult, they could just sit and learn and say, okay, but not just sit and do nothing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I like that. Let me sit and do mitzvahs and then I don't have to respond. I like that. Oh, thank you, Elaine. Yeah, thank you all. This was great. I'll see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank-
Nechama.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.